Hello guys, David Vos here again. Well, today is beautiful here in Alabama. Little Blue had puppies, I think this morning, and I don't know how many there are. I could only see one. I don't want to disturb her at the moment because she's cleaning them up, and I did notice a little black one and stuff, so they're probably going to be some beautiful things. Boy, it is just amazing here. I've got so many wonderful things happening in my life. Revelations are coming, just bam, bam, and I'm happy to be with you guys today because there's some things we need to talk about, and I hope you're having a wonderful day. For those of you who have been following my videos for some time, you probably, hopefully, many of you are up to, I'm going to go slow here because I've got some very, very important things to tell you. And I know I say that a lot. It's always true. The revelation's just getting profound. I would never, personally, I would never have believed, even just a year ago, that I would find out these beautiful things that I have found out. And there's no question in my mind, I don't think there'll be any question in most of your minds when you really fully listen to what I'm saying. I mean, I don't know what a person would think if they just came in off the street and heard one of my videos. Depending on what the video was, I suppose. I think the first reaction might be, for some, oh, this is blasphemous. This is what I was told to stay away from. This guy's a liar. He's into all kinds of evil things, and he's teaching falsehood. But I don't think, surprisingly, I haven't noticed as much of that as I thought. Perhaps because a lot of the people that are listening to my videos today have been with me for a long time. And I think that tells a lot about what we're talking about, and how when you really, listen to what we're getting into, it doesn't just sound like a lot of hogwash, but if you listen to all of what we're talking about, if you get to the root of what we're saying, it's kind of like what brings to mind, I used to hear this about the ring of truth. What that means is that when you hear a certain sound, actually this is even in the Bible, when they would hear a certain kind of trumpet blast, they knew that they would go to war. Other trumpet blasts, depending on how many trumpets would sound and everything, they had certain meanings. Same thing with bells. A lot of times you hear of church bells and other kinds of things like this that had certain meaning. And no one needs to tell you. Today we have sirens. We know if sometimes in an area where there's a lot of hurricanes or things like this, or tsunamis, and when you hear these sirens, you know that that's a warning and to get out. So it's very, very, there are certain things, is what I'm saying, that when you hear them, you know that they're true. Because, after all, there isn't any amount of evidence that one can get in this world to prove the existence of the other world, the beyond, other than going there yourself and seeing it. For those who have that testimony, they know. And for those who don't, they don't know. And they can listen to others give their testimony, and a lot of times it doesn't have the ring of truth. They're saying, well, that guy just sounds like he's making that up or something, And one way you can tell when people really aren't very genuine. They're just, in the name of Jay, they start talking weird, go into some sort of accent or something, and they start sort of all this pomp and pious activity, and sometimes insulting words or derogatory speech. Working it up, working up to a fervent pitch, as they say. And we can tell, I mean, even then, a lot of people are deceived because if you get a lot of people around in a room where there's somebody doing this, your own sort of testimony in your heart is like, well, I don't believe this. But everybody's sitting around going, oh, you're an unbeliever, and they're kind of putting shame on you. And so in those cases where people get into a crowd, they can begin to get riled up and just believe just about anything that somebody's telling them because everybody is saying you got to believe it. It's kind of like a pack of wolves. When they get together, they're fearless. But by themselves, they're little cowards. So whenever you hear someone trying to persuade you that something is true, if you don't have knowledge that what they're saying is true, if there isn't any direct, absolute ring to what they're saying, that you recognize it without any hesitation, you know that it's time, it's the sound is clear enough that you're like, okay, I think that's the sound that I need to get out of here. And if you're that certain that something's happening, you're probably going to take note of it and you're going to respond. But if somebody comes down the trail playing their flute, you're probably not going to run. So that's the kind of thing that you find. And so this is why you have a lot of people in the world that are deceived, because they're following the crowd mentality. They're just going along to get along, or they're believing things that they want to believe, regardless of whether they really think it's true. I mean, it could just be in this, as we use this word all the time, cognitive dissonance. But I guarantee that we've gone through some evidence. I guarantee it. And we've seen, on the basis of Scripture, that there's something wrong with Christianity today. And now what we're finding out, and it's hard to believe it at first, even though we see it with our own eyes, but it's hard to believe it. But it appears that just about everything that we've been taught from the Christians today is literally the opposite of the truth. And that initially can bring fear into people. And they're like, I don't want to listen to that. That's the opposite of what I was told. But yet you hear it and you think, wait a minute, it's ringing true. But no, I can't believe that. I mean, think about this. Christianity is basically teaching today, in Judaism, in Islam, many of these religions. I would go so far as to say even some Eastern beliefs today, because I'm not disparaging the Scriptures, or the Eastern Scriptures, or the Western Scriptures, or the Southern, or the North, any of the ancient esoteric. I believe they're all true. I mean, even the Old Testament is true. It is telling us the story of this world, and the God of this world, and His wrath, and His anger. However, there is another world that Jesus said, my world is no part of that world. And so in that place, what we're determining is that came from a distinct tradition. And there are two distinct traditions. And we have shown in many of the videos up to this point that both of these go back to Israel. And Israel is all of the world. And Israel was broke up into the northern and the southern and the two priesthoods. The higher priesthood of the Melchizedek priesthood and the lower priesthood of the Aaronic. So you have in the days of Jesus, you have John the Baptist, whose father was Zacharias. His mother was Elizabeth. And he was a priest after the order of Aaron. And that's significant. But most Christians aren't aware of this. This is a whole part of Christianity that we've never been told. But the Judeans had a religious belief based on the priesthood of Aaron. That was a lower priesthood. They have no idea why it is. Well, after all, Moses gave it to them, right? Well, if they had read Moses and they had listened to the Holy Spirit, and when they read without the veil, they would see in the description itself that Moses originally went up to Mount Horeb, which is the Mount of Light. Orb, or is light. And he had originally some commandments that were broken because they would not receive them. They wanted to go back to the meat pots. They didn't want to go to the promised land. They didn't want to talk to the divine one. They couldn't bear the light. So the Bible tells us, and the New Testament is very clear, and the Old Testament is very clear, with all of the symbolisms, that those commandments were broken. And then he went up to Mount Sinai and he received another set of commandments. And I'm not saying that the next set is entirely false. It's true in this world. We are in a world ruled over by a deity. And I wouldn't call him evil. I mean, we talked about the Gnostics, and one of the they claim the first Gnostic was Valentinus, which that's not true. Of course, the Gospel of John itself is a Gnostic document. John was an apostle. The Apostle Paul was accused of being Gnostic. So I don't know where we get this idea. I mean, today Christians are not Gnostic. Okay, they're Judeo-Christian. This means they believe in the God of Judea, and that old covenant that came from Sinai, not the one from Horeb or the light. So Israel was split up eventually. There were two priesthoods. The one deity was Yahweh, also called Jehovah. Some people are misunderstanding what I'm saying. They think maybe there's two deities. One's name is Jehovah and one's name is Yahweh. No, those are the same deity, but just different pronunciations. Because the Judeans forgot how to pronounce the God that they worship, supposedly. But that's not exactly why we don't have the name. The reason why is deep, and we don't want to get into that today. But the other side, the 10 tribes, they were up north, the majority of the world, right? If we're all Israel, the 12 tribes, all of us, then only 2 formed the southern kingdom, Judah and Benjamin. But they also had some of the Levitical priesthood there with them. Now, the 10 tribes also had a form of Judaism because Dan went way up north and it was a long ways. It really is symbolic of the fact that Dan would go on his ships and go to Europe. And up there, they wouldn't be able to come down to Jerusalem because it would be thousands of miles. You have to go on boats, and you wouldn't be able to do that because you're supposed to meet 3 times in a year. So they made their own Judean religion. They took some Aaronic priests and took it to Dan. And they took the Aaronic priesthood with them on the boats. And this is Judaism, but it's not the Judaism that is centered around the Jerusalem of that day. I mean, that Jerusalem was destroyed, as Jesus proclaimed. But the scattered tribes that went up into Europe then couldn't go to Jerusalem. They had already destroyed it. So they had their own beliefs that go back to this Aaronic priesthood. And so it also was very clear that this Aaronic priesthood, the lower priesthood, was what the early Gnostics called the demiurge, or it wasn't the heavenly Father, which was El, the father of the deities, but it was one of the deities who was an angel. This is something we find in Paul's writings, the Gnostic, where he says that Judaism was the worship of angels in Colossians chapter 2. And Acts chapter 7 says that the tent of Moses that they carried, which they got once the veil had been put on his face because they rejected the light, and they had got the other commandments which were written in stone. Paul says is your stony heart. It's all very symbolic, everything that happened. We were all there on that day, and we all rejected the Heavenly Father and received Yahweh, the deceiver, the liar, the angels, by the hand of an angel, and a covenant that was administered to mankind. And Paul, speaking to the Corinthians, said that our fathers, talking to Corinthians in Asia Minor, Greeks, right? The gospel would go to the Jews first and then after to the Greeks. Well, why not to the rest of the world? Well, it would go to the rest of the world, but an awakening was happening in a certain number of the ancient Israelites. They began to wake up to who they were. Those were people up in Europe. The rest of the world was destined to awaken in the latter days, which is the restoration of all things spoken of by the mouth of all the holy prophets, which the Bible talks about, which is the days that we're living in now. So in the days of the apostles, all we had then that knew who they were at that time were the Judeans and the Greeks, and the gospel went to both. The reason why is because the Greeks had a different lineal descendant of Judea that was ruling over them, because all of the tribes were ruled over by Judah, because the prophecy was that the scepter, which is the right to rule, would not depart from Judah until he who comes who has the legal right. So all the tribes have to have a royal bloodline to rule over them. That means of Judea. And so whether you're in deepest Africa or furthest China, or the far north of, Sweden, in Russia, in Siberia, or down in the tip of South Africa, wherever you are one of the tribes of Israel, and you had a member of the royal bloodline with you, because you could not have a nation or form a nation without a priesthood, and you either went by the Aaronic, or the Aaronic from Aaron, or the higher mysteries. So, most of the world's religions of the nations were from the 10 lost tribes, and they carried on these mysteries, which were true mysteries, the mysteries of God, written in the stars. And the religions that we have today that have come down to us from this rite, the Melchizedek priesthood, that Abraham received from promise, right? And then later on Yahweh came and gave him a law and certain things he had to do in order to get a blessing. Keep all these laws and commandments, put him under a curse. But before that, he got the promise, according to the Apostle Paul, which cannot be made void because of the law. It only came in like an appendage to the real priesthood. So the real deity is El, and they worship El at Bethel in the northern kingdom. So that is the true priesthood. The mysteries that were written in the stars, the holy mysteries that were the holy word of divine being. And as we've said, Arios means holy. So Arios Gamos meant the holy marriage. The Arios glyph, the hieroglyph, is the holy writings. The people today in Christianity have been so far removed from the truth that they don't understand the apostasy happened right away, to the point where we now have everything backwards. So the holy word of the divine being is not actually just the 66 books that we have today called the Bible. Those writings, many of them, stem from ancient, they have dug up Egyptian writings from the pharaohs that are almost word for word scriptures that we have in Psalms and Song of Solomon and Ecclesiastes. And the reason why is because Solomon did not reign in this place called Palestine. Solomon was a Sol Amun. This was an Egyptian deity. The Nag Hammadi library came from Luxor, Egypt. This is where the Temple of Solomon was built. And we find it to this day. It is there. So a lot of the illusion is we're reading a little story called Israel. And we think they're just all their little country about the size of New Hampshire. Right? And in this little country the size of New Hampshire, there is the 7 Canaanite nations. There's the Hittites and the Moabites and the Jebusites. There's the Philistines. They had the 5 axis lords of the Philistines. In other words, there were 5 tribes of Philistines. And each of these tribes is probably numbering in the hundreds of thousands, some of them millions. The Hittites were a very large number up in the north. There were the Amorites, the Amalekites. We could go on and on of the numbers of peoples that were in this little area, which would be impossible. You see, Abraham had a grand battle with King Chedorlaomer and another king of Elam. This is Persia and Babylon, and they came out 5 of these, millions of armies come to face Abraham, And the Bible today is translated, in his armies, he had 18 people or something, but it not really like that. He had 18 legions of armies. It was a world war between the Eastern kings and Egypt, because Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were pharaohs. Because the Bible tells you this, that Abraham went to Egypt, stood on a mountain, which we now know is the Great Pyramid, the only mountain, a man-made mountain, on the Nile. And he stood upon it, and he looked eastward, northward, westward, and southward, in all directions. And El Elyon made a promise and said, to all the land that you can see, and wherever your foot shall tread, I will give the land to thee. Abraham, you will be a multitude in all the earth, and you will be the father of a great multitude of people and nations. You see, not just to 12 nations, not just to 12 nations plus Esau, right, or something that way, but all the nations. Multitude meaning many, many, many hordes and numbers, all of the nations. We find that the promise extends to every nation in many places in the Old Testament as well as the New Testament, like in Revelation chapter 7, where it says, I saw in a great multitude of every nation, tribe, tongue, and people. So the Apostle Paul says Abraham is the father of faith, all faith. And so all the religions, like Buddhism, we've talked about Shintoism, we've talked about Zoroastrianism and Mithraism, and all the religions either stem from the Aaronic or the Melchizedek priesthood. So somewhere along the line there was a split. We find in the Old Testament, we find that there was a thing where Yahweh had a wife at the beginning. And then as time, and there was an El originally, right? And of course the Israelites did worship El, but the Old Testament's like, oh, we hate El and Baal and all these other gods and stuff, and I'm a jealous God. Don't go out there, because he became jealous, and he ended up abandoning his wife, which is just a little symbolic story. But the story truly is, the whole thing is symbolic, is that the woman was separated from the man by Yahweh through law. And she had to wear a veil, because you couldn't partake of that. So there was a split in the psyche and in religion and in government. So these other religions had women priests. Judaism never allowed women. This is why people say, well, how come in the Bible women are allowed to preach and they're allowed to teach and they're not allowed to be priests or kings or even sign a document? They're all slaves. Well, how is it that Deborah is the mother of Israel? Well, she's not the mother of Judeans. She's the mother of all of Israel. And she brought them all together under her teachings as a great high priest at Bethel. And Elijah worshipped at Bethel. And there was another priesthood. They had a Urim and Thummim. They had an ephod and a breastplate, an oracle that they spoke to the divine being. And so they preached in the high places and in the groves. And this is what Elijah did. He eventually went and raised up the widow of Zarephath. And Jesus said to the Judeans, was there no widows in Judea at the time? No. He had to go to Syria, to a city called Zarephath. Zara is this word that we get Sarah, or the Asherah, which was originally the wife of Yahweh. So they separated. They condemned the woman. And so what that's a symbol of is the fact that Yahweh cursed the woman, and he cursed the serpent, and he cursed the ground. So the ground wouldn't produce for them. They couldn't have life because the trees of life wouldn't grow. It produced thorns and thistles. The woman was cursed because she had to have a veil and be subject to her husband. Therefore, she could not be a deity. She could not be a teacher. And the serpent, who is Jesus Christ, I know a lot of you will click off right there. We've done many videos on this. But he cursed the serpent because the serpent spoke the truth. Because after all, Jesus came to give us life and to make us like God, which is what the serpent said, that Yahweh was a liar. And Jesus said that to the Pharisees, is your father's a liar and a deceiver. And he is the devil. My Father's above and he's in heaven, heavenly Father, and your Father is beneath. He's just a fallen angel, as Paul says. So, we've covered all of this, and I just want to we've spent 25 minutes giving a little bit of a little background. I tell you this because I want to relate to you guys my experience with the mushroom. And for those of you who don't know what that is, it's the Holy Sacrament. And I suppose there's just no way. I've done it again. I've just carried on and talked for almost 30 minutes now, and we haven't even got to the explanation and the story about the experience that I had, which is what the point of this video will be. But I'm very, very cautious to just tell you guys, because you won't believe me. Those of you who have been watching for my videos for a long time, you will believe me. But for many of those who just tuned in, won't. So I've got to give a preview of what we've been saying. And then that might help people to not just click off and think that this is all just crazy. And then maybe they'll go back and watch some of the other videos. But let's just jump right in here. So the great Holy Sacrament was something that made your eyes open so that you could become like God, that Yahweh forbade and Jesus gave to the world. And without going into any further details to why that is so, let me tell you my experience. So, I found out about the mushroom some time ago. The Lord was giving me these revelations, and it was just blowing my mind. And I was like, well, how do you get one of these mushrooms, right? And first of all, it's illegal to purchase for internal use. It is legal to buy the mushroom for external use. But for any other sacramental use, it is not legal in this country. So we have to be very careful what we talk about. And I cannot say to you that you should go out and do this. So what I'm going to say, in order to keep my videos going and my channel up, I have to abide by the law. So it is illegal in this country, and I have to point that out. It is classified as a poison, and there is a reason. Now, we've got all this going on where it's all condemned and it's illegal and stuff. And that's the other hand, we've got these stories that we watch, these Disney programs and all this mystical paintings that we've seen. We always see this great big beautiful picture. It's like a dark forest. There's like cedar trees and pines and maybe a pine cone laying here or there. Maybe a birch tree in the background. And there's always a little serpent. Well, that's the serpent in the garden. See, we have this same depiction of the paradise or the garden story in all of the world, even up in Europe. We have these things called fairies, and you usually see a little fairy. Now, a fairy, today we don't understand what that is. Well, in ancient times, that was a bee with a human face, because they believed that the bee was holy and made the holy honey. And I don't want to talk about the honey right now or get into that, but these fairies would come, which were spiritual forces that in nature come along to create the Holy Sacrament, to open one's eyes so that they might become like God and know good from evil, to be able to learn the difference so that we can be initiated in the process into the higher consciousness. And so in the center of the great picture, under the cedar and the birch trees and this beautiful setting, you see with a serpent winding around, or sometimes they'll use a salamander or something like that. And there will be this mushroom. It's a red mushroom with little red, white spots. I won't even name it. You'll probably know what I'm talking about. So, I finally got a hold of some. And I want to say here, before we describe my experience, is be very, very careful in what you're doing. In order for me to do this without getting in trouble, I cannot mention the name of this mushroom. And I'm not even going to describe it again, because I just don't, it's too important that I stay online so that we can talk and discuss these things amongst ourselves. So let me just say, mushrooms per se. We'll just talk about it as though it's just mushrooms. Because mushrooms are not legal. There's portobello and there's the other little white mushrooms you go, the button, whatever they are at the store. So just imagine a mushroom, okay? So I went to the store, let's just say, just for argument's sake, I went to the store and I got a mushroom. Now, I want you to know that when you're preparing your mushroom, you must dry out the mushroom in order to have the Holy Sacrament. You must dry it out, preferably on the rocks in the sunlight. But others have done it in various ways, and you can buy it from certain individuals for topical use, let me iterate, already dried. Well, what you do is you make a tea with it, and you would probably start with maybe a quarter of a cap. Not very much. Do not start with a lot. You must not take too much. Everybody has a different tolerance to the mushroom, but they are healing, and I don't think you could take too much that would kill you or anything like that, okay? But what happens is that you may experience lucid dreaming, and before you go into the lucid dreams, there is a place where you're literally being initiated by Mother Nature into these mysteries. You will face your demons, and it can be a very frightening thing. And so very, very few people like the experience of the mushroom, because if they're not seeking higher consciousness, they may not enjoy the experience at all. In fact, it may be very terrifying. And for me, it was, at some point, it was. But it also caters to your desire. If you are seeking physical healing, you will receive it. It may take, you have to get the proper dose. So you'll have to experiment with a small dose and work your way up. If you're seeking higher consciousness, it will oblige you. But whatever you do, you must, this is not something you do as a recreational habit. This is a holy sacrament. It is a healing herb. None of these herbs, even cannabis, is supposed to be something you do every day. They are healing herbs. You can microdose on them for periods of time. But I don't believe that these herbs are to be taken in large doses every day at all. I recently, and I will do some more videos on that, also even alcohol in any form, even wine. You know, Jesus drank wine and gave it to his disciples. Of course, we'll find out that it is spiked with herbs. And this is what gave them the opening of the eyes as they recognized Christ. But it was not something that type of beverage or this herb, it's not something they were to do every day. It was something they did as a religious experience. Now, that doesn't mean that we're not allowed to eat the herbs, because all of the plants are herbs and we're supposed to eat them every day. But we're supposed to eat them in moderation, and we're supposed to eat them, in certain ways that it would take too long to explain the whole thing here. But I can tell you that alcohol, especially in the form that's not natural, like if you make wine naturally, it can be healthy for you in low doses, but not every day. Alcohol, even in the form of just wine, can be very damaging to the body, especially when you are in modern society and you're eating potato chips and terrible foods and fatty foods that aren't the kind of fats you're supposed to, hydrogenated and all of these things, and la-da-da-da-da. You can get very sick. I'm going to do a video on what cancer is. The Lord has revealed in vision to me what cancer is so that I understand it and I can explain. And I promise you, I give you my word, I know if any of you out there have cancer, okay, now again, I cannot make any claims that any herb can cure you on this podcast. But I will tell you that I do know the secret of what cancer is. It is not what we've been told. It is a very simple thing that's caused from diet. And you would not even understand or even begin to imagine what I'm going to say. So we'll do a video on that. But back to this experience that I had. But the point of that was, friends, if you're drinking alcohol every day, stop. It will lead to death. You won't know that it's the cause because you think, well, I'm just aging, right? Now I'm 60, 70, whatever, and I'm dying. Oh, well, it's just old age. No, it isn't. We don't do that. You must eat the herbs in moderation every day. The herbs of the field, the fruit of the vegetation of the earth. All right. So I finally got the herb, and I was describing how you would make it. So you make it in a tea. You just take maybe, if it comes in powdered form, you would take a spoonful, maybe 2 or 3 spoonfuls in a couple of cups of water, and make a tea and drink that. Start with, I'd say, 2 teaspoons. If you don't really feel anything, you can up it to 4. And if you're still not feeling much, you maybe a little makes you tired or something, but nothing real happens, then you might go up to about 6 or 7 teaspoons. But so you have to know, because some people, it may be 3 teaspoons and bam, they've got it, the experience already, because everybody's different. And not only that, every mushroom has a different potency. So we just can't say take this much or that much. So I would say start off with small doses for sure. Definitely do not take a large dose at first, because the experience, and by the way, you must have someone present with you that is not going through the experience. You must have someone to monitor, because people go through a period at the beginning where there's a repetitive loop as they're going in, and they sort of go into this place that I would call hell. And people, because of this, say, oh, I don't want any more to do with this stuff. It's crazy. I had the worst experience of my life. I'll never do it again. Well, they weren't seeking higher consciousness, or they just didn't know what was happening. Because in order to receive higher consciousness, you must defeat the devil first. Jesus did this himself for 40 days and 40 nights. He fasted, and of course he partook of the holy herb. And in that state, he met the devil. How else are you going to find the devil? The devil is your lower ego, and you must come in contact with it, and most people don't even know the devil. They don't know who they are. They don't know what this world is, but you must know, and you must learn the difference between good and evil. You must face your demons and reject them and overcome them. And then afterwards, the angels will come and minister unto you, because the angels are for the ministering of those who are to inherit salvation. That's what the Bible tells us. So, be aware that it's going to very possibly be a very harrowing experience. You may go to a place in your childhood where something terrible happened that you didn't even remember, that you repressed. It could be, I think it works, and others have said, and in my own experience, I believe that it works on issues that you have that go back to your very earliest childhood memories, as well as pre-life memories. And it may take more than once to get through these and get to the place where it starts working on other aspects of your evolution and your higher consciousness. So at first it can be very, very frightening. I went through that, and I saw that the Lord showed me that I was under my conscious mind. I may look calm, but underneath, my mind is in a fury to try and find truth and answers. It's anxiety. It is I was a deep insecurity within me that I had to overcome, but I wasn't aware of. And I was faced with all of these fears. And I thought I was in hell, and I didn't think I was going to get out of there. Because it may have only been 5-10 minutes. I don't know. It may have been 30 minutes or an hour or two. It seemed like forever. We cannot judge these things because we're in this sort of trance. But it was, I remember at the time I was thinking, oh my Lord, help me. I am just, I felt like, and I don't want to scare anyone, but I want you to understand this. This can be very dangerous if you are not trusting in the Lord. You got to have somebody present, and you have to understand this is a religious experience. But when you come back, you will be healed. And now you may have, as I say, you may have to do this several times, because there's several things. Sometimes you don't take a high enough dose, and you've got to kind of go deeper. So, myself, I am not done. I'm not finished with this. And I'm going to show you a little clip here where, again, the Lord has blessed me, because I went out here behind the house just, it was yesterday, I believe, the day before, and lo and behold, I found right there at this place that I had already, in my own mind, had thought that's where I wanted to go look. because it was a tree, a pine. There was a little grove of pine trees there, and it was a little cedar. And I noticed that because I was looking for pine pitch, which is another story. It's very, this is what we would use as the incense while we were doing it. You can find some pine pitch, and you can burn that. And I'll tell you guys, and maybe in another video. We're running out of time, and I don't have time to explain how to use the pine pitch. But and also there's some various things that we can talk about. I've got so much to say. It looks like we're going to have to do at least another video on this particular. I'm hoping I can get my experience in this video. But I'm going to have to spend at least another whole hour explaining Mother Mary and Mary Magdalene and the Holy Mysteries and how it relates to Rome and Christ. Is so much I don't think I'm going to be able to get to. I know I'm kind of rambling here because I just have so much on my mind I want to tell you, and I don't even know where to begin. And I'm kind of constrained because I need to tell you about my experience. So I'll show you that clip here, and then I'll get back to you. Well, come back out. My morning walk. What a beautiful day. Blue's about ready to give birth. I want to come out here and check for some pitch, see if there's any more pitch on this tree. There's a little bird feather. And maybe there'll be a mushroom or something. Can't wait till the Amanita come out. Don't even know if this area has them. Oh my gosh. What's that? That looks like an Amanita from here. Am I kidding you? That is an Amanita. It's not the Amanita muscara, but it's an Amanita. Yes. Oh my goodness. We hit the jackpot. This is a... it's a type of Amanita, I know that. I think they call them carrot foot or something. Oh my goodness. I wonder if there's any more. That is so amazing, guys. Wow. Oh, buddy. Over here is where I was looking. This is awesome. Yeah, there's my little bunch of resin coming down there. But it's not much. I can't reach it up there. But I'll come back here in a little week or two and it should be a little bit more during the fall. Oh, this is so awesome. Right in this area where there's some pines. There's quite a few big pines up here. And that's where you find them, underneath the pine trees. Oh. Huh. I'm so happy. Oh my goodness. Funny how there's just one, you know. This means that there'll probably be more here in a few days, or as the fall gets coming towards fall. Oh man, this thing is so amazing. It's like kind of heavy, you know. Isn't that beautiful? That was just amazing, and I just was so happy. But let me tell you about my experience. So I partook of a very large dose, at least was the largest dose I had to that point. and went to bed and began to dream lucid dreams, where this is what we call it, a lucid dream. Now, some would say it's just dreams, it's nothing. But I guarantee that you yourself leave your body and go to a place where the angels instruct you. You even will see angels. They will form a group around you. They will talk to you. You can ask them anything you want. You can remember what to ask. This is why you should ask them before you even partake. And then they'll come for that very reason. They will, sometimes I think there are issues that are more pressing that they will talk to you about. But for the most part, as you get going, you have certain things you want to find answers to, and you may basically ask the Lord and the Holy Mother what you have on mind, and then you partake, and it will reveal it to you. And I guarantee it works. So I was brought to a place that was very beautiful. I want to try and explain this to you. I shared briefly with you the other day. There was a mountain, and it was a beautiful mountain with trees, pine trees, at the top. Just like we've been talking about. There was these beautiful pine trees. And there was this beautiful river. I would call it a creek. It wasn't like a vast, mile-wide Mississippi River, but it was a narrow, fast-flowing creek coming down, boisterous and bubbling and just amazing, coming down from the top of the mountain, down the hill, straight down, and right to my abode, which was a white home without any doors, and angels protecting my home. And I was told in my mind telepathically the interpretation as I went. I saw the angels, and I was aware that there were angels there protecting me. And I was aware, and I looked at the well. There was a huge well in front of the door. And I saw the river coming down. And it would flow into the well. And I thought, well, that was very, very interesting. I'd never seen anything like it. Like, how did the water find its way to that hole and fall into the hole? Like, it just went right down and into the hole and down deep. And as I was looking at this deep well, you remember Jesus talked about the living waters from your innermost being bubbling up into eternal life. And I was thinking about that, and I was having these questions about this, and I turned and I noticed that there was an Enterprise at the down below where I was. I was like halfway down the mountain where I lived. And below me, there was this beautiful kind of like a garden and some sort of enterprise. People down there doing something. I don't know if they were buying and selling or working of some sort, producing some sort of product. I don't know. It was a kind of an enterprise that I didn't understand. I didn't know what they were doing, but I knew that it was below where I was at the bottom of the hill. And as I was looking at that and wondering what that was, I was like, why are these people there and what are they doing? And then to my right, coming down the hill, down the mountain, along the river, came a woman dressed in black, and she had a veil. And I'll tell you, at first I thought, what is this, Mary Poppins? It looked like Mary Poppins. And I'm like, what is Mary Poppins doing in this place that, it seems so beautiful, like paradise? And it was like I didn't have to literally walk up to her in real time and communicate that way. It was more like I would turn to whatever I was looking at and speak to it, and it would just tell me. And I turned to her, and I basically was like, why are you wearing black? Who are you? She said that she was Mary. And I said, why are you wearing black? Wouldn't you be wearing white? And I didn't know. And I looked it up afterwards to get more information. But it blows my mind, the revelation that began to come after I woke up and the Lord began to explain why this was. This is something that I'll explain in another video. But, we talk about the Holy Virgin Mother. Well, she's also a widow. And this is where Jesus went and raised up the widow's son, just like Elijah did. Also, Elisha did this. And what we're going to find out is that he was awakening the priesthood of a certain woman. Now, the woman wore a black clothing because her husband had died, but she would still have the veil. And that meant she was conducting they only wore the veil when there's a story, for instance, an example in the Bible where Judah met a woman called Tamar, and it says there that she had a veil, and he knew because of the veil that she was a prostitute. Well, in our world today, we just think, well, she's just some common prostitute. But that's not what it was at all. See, Judah was a king, and in order for him to have a seed of the lineal descent from Adam to produce the Messiah, he had to have a relation with the Holy Mother, who performed the great sacred wedding by being veiled. The fact that the woman that I was seeing was a Mary, and this is why we call Mary Poppins Mary, because she is a symbol of this. The fact that I noticed the veil and all of this, and as I asked her about it, she said because she was coming to bring life to the world, that she was in the state of mourning, and there needed to have living waters needed to be brought to the lower regions of the world. And I thought about this and I couldn't understand. And she said, look at the water. And I looked back at the river, and now, instead of going into the hole, into the well, the angels there had made a channel on the other side of the well so that the water would flow into the well and then fill up the deep, infinite well of my innermost being and bubble up unto eternal life of my physical body. Because sometimes all of us have living waters coming down from the Father, but it goes into our deep innermost being and doesn't come out and get to the outer parts of our physical body. And this is why we're dying. This is why the world that we're living in is collapsing. This is why I was in such darkness at the time. So I looked back at Mary, and she said, you're in charge. Because I asked her, what was all of this enterprise going on down below? And she says, you're in charge. I said, I didn't know I was in charge. I looked at the river, and it was now flowing down the hill. And I was told that my physical body is an exact replica of spiritual things. And so, just as I was unaware that I was in charge of this enterprise in the dream, I was also unaware that I had the ability to allow the living waters to flow if I only asked. But I didn't know that I wasn't getting the living waters into my carnal physical body, and it was sick. Because I had been asking for healing. Because you see, a lot of you who follow my channel and stuff probably don't know this. I don't think I've ever mentioned this, but when I was about 13 or 14 years old, we lived in Idaho at the time, and this is right at the point when my father had grown the beard, and we got shunned, and we were thrown out, and there was all these elders meetings and so forth. A lot was going on at the time, but my mom and dad had bought 5 acres up in Idaho, up in a little town called Bonners Ferry, which is just about 30 miles from the Canadian border. And we had we were building this, my dad was building this 3-story wooden kind of cabin lodge or something. It was 3 stories, but it was very rustic and so forth. But anyway, there was across the driveway, I guess you'd say, because there's just 5 acres there. So I walked maybe an acre or so away from the place, and across the driveway thing, there was a bunch of boards that were piled up, and it was like it was where my brother had built his cabin. And I don't know how he did it or whatever, but the walls were all like one piece. And they were all, each, like 4 walls were stacked on the ground. one upon another. And I wanted to lift this whole wall. I was very strong at the time. I was a young man, very healthy and strong. I mean, I spent my whole life, building, and we were using the Pulaski and skinning the logs and, putting shakes on the roof. I was very, very healthy and strong at the time. I had quite a bit of strength for my size. And I remember I was thinking, well, I can do this. And I lifted this entire wall. It must have weighed, I don't know, a lot of, imagine the boards, the plywood, the outer, paneling and everything else, and the nails and stuff. And it was the size of the whole one side of a house. So I lifted it up, and I managed to lift it up above my head. Well, when I got it up there, I noticed it was nails. There was nails coming through. And I got myself in a position where I was holding it, but I realized, what was I doing? There was no point to holding it. I couldn't move it. It was too heavy to get it. The nails were hung up on it, and I couldn't move it. And in a flash of about 20, 30, 40 seconds, I'm standing there holding it, not knowing what to do, because if I drop it, the whole thing's going to come down on me, because I couldn't, throw it up in the air and run out. I knew that at some point I was going to have to drop it, and this entire wall with the nails is going to come down on me. And so I'm sitting there thinking, and I'm like, oh my Lord. And I in one foul thing, I just kind of pushed it and ran out from under it just before it hit the ground. I don't think it hit me as I remember it. But what it did was, I had more muscle than what my bones could handle. So I guess most of the weight was on one leg rather than the other one, my right leg, which I probably be favored. And it literally pushed my leg bone up into the hip socket about an inch or half an inch. And so, hence, I've been about an inch shorter. Well, eventually it caused me to be probably an inch or so shorter than I would normally be, not only because my leg was pushed up about a half an inch, but that caused a lot of pain throughout my life, and so my back was always out, and I developed sort of a hunchback, and probably a lot of that was for that reason, and some of it was because of the anxiety that I went through, losing my religion, my family. I felt like the whole world was on my shoulders, but my back had hurt my entire life. I was, by a doctor, permanently disabled due to the state that I was in, my back. So my mother took me to, I complained about it for a while, and it wasn't getting any better. Finally, my mother took me to a chiropractor, and the chiropractor said, well, I don't know if we can get it out back to normal, but we can give him some treatments, and it might come back. And he told me to take some calcium pills and so forth. Well, of course, I only went to one session, and it didn't actually pop out, so I was always kind of limping on that leg for the rest of my life. So I've been seeking, it just caused a great deal of pain. I couldn't work a lot of the time in my life. A lot of people thought, that I was maybe lazy or something like that. I would quit a job here and there a lot because I just couldn't bear standing and working. It hurt so bad. I would be bedridden for weeks at a time. So I've been praying for healing for years, and I've never received the healing that I needed. And this vision that Mary gave me was telling me on several levels. One, the life-giving force that I had was coming down, and I was receiving spiritual enlightenment. I had a good relationship with the divine, and spiritually I was doing all right. But my physical body was in great deal of pain because there was a blockage. The living vibrations in water, life-giving water, was not reaching something, was a blockage. And I believe it was right there in my hip. That's where this blockage was. So as soon as I saw this vision and the angels opened up a channel so that the water that was bubbling up could flow down the river to the Enterprise, which represented my physical body, well, I think in one sense it my upper body was healthy, very healthy, and I've always been a healthy person, but my leg was not healthy. So the flow of energy was not getting through my hip and getting down through into the leg. And this was causing a great deal of trouble. It was difficult to work, to, get around. I was limping most of my life. There were times when I was bedridden, so it was causing a lot of trouble. But on the other hand, there was another aspect to it. But the next day when I woke up, I felt completely healed. And there was a little soreness, but it was pretty much gone, and I don't have that limp as much at all. And then a few days later, it completely went away. A couple of days later, basically, it just all went away. And I know that it was complete healing. But there was much more, to my surprise. This whole experience that I went through was to teach me a greater lesson about this physical world and the life-giving forces. So I will tell you more about the vision I had, because I'm coming up to an hour. I haven't even got through all of this because there's just so much that I want to tell you, and I feel as though I've done a very poor job getting to what I wanted to tell you. I have so many things that the Lord has been explaining and stuff, so we'll get back to it tomorrow, and I promise you, you won't be disappointed. I will do, I won't go back into what we've already covered. I'm just going to go straight into it, and I'm going to give you some information that will blow your living mind about the truth, about the true priesthood, about our true relationship to our Father in heaven and our Divine Mother, and what is really going on. We're going to introduce scriptures. The Lord has shown me many verses of the Bible that teaches stuff that you have never known or heard of in your life. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and go, and we'll see you tomorrow. Have a good one, friends.